Many people, when talking about the skeleton of the human body, they make the mistake of assuming that the skull is a single bone. It is not. The skull is actually over 20 bones all fused together into this amazing three-dimensional puzzle that we call the skull. So we're going to go through the individual bones today, try to name them, find them on our own skull, and then go ahead and I'll use a cat skull here to help you kind of see what those bones look like and how they fit. Understand that the cat, even though it has the same bones, mostly it has the same bones, they're simply a different size and shape. Remember, the cat was created, the bones are the same, but the bones are created with a different size and shape to serve the cat in the way that the cat needs to live. So when the cat was created, it was created with a different design than ours. Even though the bones are pretty much the same, they're just different sizes and shapes. So we're going to go through, we're going to use the cat skull and show those similarities, and at the same time, we're going to try to find those bones on our own skull. We're going to start at the very back of the skull in a bone called the occipital. The occipital is the bone way back here in the back of the cat skull, right there. It has that large hole. That large hole is called the foramen magnum. The foramen magnum is where the spinal cord comes up from the vertebrae and connects up with the brain, which is inside of here. It connects up and it passes through that big hole. That big hole is called the foramen magnum. Now don't get thrown by the 25-cent word foramen magnum. That just makes us sound smart, right? Yes, it's the foramen magnum. Quite so, yeah. Foramen magnum in Latin just means big hole, okay? Every 25-cent word has a 5-cent meaning. So just means the big hole. So that's the foramen magnum. Now, we can't find our foramen magnum simply because we have all these neck muscles and everything else all the way around. But what you can find is there's a bump right about there, just above your neck muscles on the back of your skull. So hopefully you brought a skull with you today. Okay, good. You have a bump right there. That bump is this particular bump right there. It's where your occipital bone and your parietals join together, and it's that bump. Now, ladies, if you're having a hard time finding yours, that's normal. Most women do not have a large bump right there. Most men do. It's not 100% either way, but more often than not, that bump is very large on guys and it's not so large on ladies. Okay, so, but it's right there. That's the joining point, just above your two neck muscles in the back on that particular bone. That's the starting. That's the top of your occipital. Your foramen magnum is underneath your head because you are a biped. So your head is on top of your shoulders versus the quadruped where the head is kind of in front of the animal. It's not on top, it's in front. So their foramen magnum is angled toward the back. Yours is underneath. So that's where the occipital is and the foramen magnum. Coming from that bump, if you work yourself forward, work your fingers forward, you'll find a couple of large bumps just behind your ears. Those large bumps, if you were a cat, you could start at that right there and you work yourself forward and you would find that large bump right there. That large bump is what you're feeling behind your ear. Well, that then becomes your ear. See that large opening? That opening leads into a large chamber right there. This one's broken off, but it's inside of that chamber that you would find the small ear bones and all the workings of the inner ear inside of that. So that is where your ear is. So this really, these are not your ears. These are called the auricles of the ear. Auricle is just nerd for a big sound catcher. Okay, it's going to capture the sound, bring it into your ear, cause those bones to vibrate together. That is then translated from air vibrations into fluid vibrations into electrical signals that your brain can then interpret and understand it as sound, whether it's language or a dish that's crashing somewhere or whatever. It's able to do that. So that goes from your occipital. Your parietals then, if that's your occipital back here, your parietals are the bones that are kind of up on top of your skull, a little bit up here where your hat would be, but toward the back. That's your parietal bones right there. And you've got two of them and they're fused together. Underneath your parietal, right here kind of behind your ear, you have what is known as the temporal bone. In animals, it's called the squamosal. But that temporal bone, if these are the parietals, the temporal bone is right there. Or again, in this animal, the squamosal. Now that squamosal has this projection that sticks out, and that becomes the back part of your cheekbone. So from your squamosal, which is right here, we have the beginning of your cheekbone right there. If you follow that cheekbone forward about to here, you're now on a bone right there that we call the jugal. So on this animal, you can see on the cat, you can see there is the projection from the squamosal or the temporal bone coming forward. Here is the jugal right there. And the jugal is going to connect with this bone right here that has the teeth in it. And that bone is called the maxillary. So the temporal bone, the temporal comes forward, connects up with the jugal right here, and then just inside right there underneath your eye, that's the maxillary. And it goes up on the sides of your nose right here, and it comes all the way down, and it has all of your teeth except the teeth in the very front. That's a little bit different. We'll talk about that one in a second. So except for those teeth in the very front. So those teeth that's the maxillary. Now on top of your nose, this is the side. On the very top of your nose right here, you have two small bones. Those are called the nasal bones. So you can see we come forward. Now we're on the maxillary and we come up. Here's the maxillary bone right here. And you can see right there, those are the two nasal bones. So you've got the nasal bones here, not the squishy part, but the crunchy part right there, okay? That's your nasal bones. Those all connect up with this bone right here, what we call the forehead, or in my case, a 5 head. But there you go. This is called the frontal bone. Now in humans, the frontal bone is fused into one bone. We have one bone that goes across called the frontal bone. In animals like the cat, this is the frontal bone, and you can see it still has that division going down there. So unless these animals get really old, that really does not ossify and fuse. These bones remain as two separate bones. But that's the frontal bone right there. And of course, the frontal bone continues back and connects back with the parietals, and it keeps on going. And all of those bones kind of form most of the facial bones here, and then back onto the back part of the cranium here, and then of course the cheekbone right there. Now in the very, very front, there's two smaller bones right here and here. These bones, you can see them, they're really tiny ones right there. These bones fuse together like that, and you can see there's little openings in them, and that's for your incisors. The incisors are your teeth right here in the front. You've got 4 of them, the cat has 6 of them. Those are the teeth that are right here in the front. Those are your pre-maxillary bones. Now again, in cats, they remain separate. In many mammals, most mammals, they remain separate. They do not fuse with the rest of the skull. However, in humans, the pre-maxillary fuses with the maxillary to form one bone all the way across. And those are pretty much the bones that you could see on the top of the skull all the way around like that. So those are the bones. Underneath, there's some other bones that we have to look at. So you can see these are the maxillary bones right there, and they joined with the palatine bones, which are right there. All of those bones, the 2 maxillary plates right there, the bottom of the maxillary, and those palatine bones, those fuse together to form what we call the hard palate. The hard palate is that upper part, the upper part of your mouth. That's the hard palate. There's a soft palate back behind that's a little bit flexible. If you sleep with your mouth open, that will vibrate. Okay, that's what causes snoring. Okay, but all that is going on. You've got the hard palate and the soft palate. The hard palates are actually bony. Behind those, we begin to lay what is simply called, figure the floor of the skull, where the brain's going to sit. Remember, the brain's going to sit inside of here, so it's got to have a floor to sit on. And those bones would be the sphincter, or first you have the vomer, forgive me, the vomer, and on top of the vomer is a bone kind of right in the middle, right down the middle of your hard palate. and sitting on top of that is called the ethmoid bone. Though the ethmoid is the bone that divides the left nasal passage from the right, and at the back of the ethmoid bone, I can show you these right here. Here's the vomer, and the ethmoid bone sits in like this. And at the very back of the ethmoid bone, you can see that is called the cribriform plate. And that's really kind of cool because the cribriform plate is what allows the nasal nerves, your olfactory sense, your sense of smell, those nerves from the nasal passages to go back through that ethmoid bone, through that cribriform plate, and directly into your brain so that your sense of smell can be, so that you have a sense of smell. Interestingly enough, the rest of your senses pretty much have to go through a filtering process so that you can eliminate the things that are unnecessary. For instance, right now, my words are very, very important to you. You're focused on them, and you're not focused on, for instance, how your socks are feeling on your feet or your shoes are feeling. Oh, wait, until now. Now you can feel them because you're thinking about them, right? Your brain never stopped feeling your socks and shoes on your feet. That's assuming you're wearing socks and shoes right now, but your brain never stopped feeling those things, okay? But eventually your brain says, yeah, I know they're there. Tell me if they come off. Well, with the sense of smell, your brain doesn't have that filtering process. It's almost like an emergency sense, so you can smell smoke or other things that would be dangerous, and your brain immediately is alerted to it. To this day, I'm 50-something years old. To this day, I remember if I smell a stick of cherry chapstick, I'm immediately transported to when I was 12 years old and spent my summer in the high desert of Gregg, Colorado, exploring the hills and all the fun stuff out there. I was out there, and literally to this day, if I smell cherry chapstick, I am brought back to that summer when I was 12 years old. It's really, really cool. So that's kind of that has nothing to do with the bones of the skull. It's just really cool. So that's the ethmoid bone with the cribriform plate, and that's where those olfactory nerves are. Behind that, you have the sphenoid bone. Now in the cat, it's a couple of bones, the sphenoid, but pretty much the sphenoid bone looks like it looks like a butterfly. It's kind of butterfly shaped. And the sphenoid bone has these large wings that go up. Now you can feel where those wings are. When you rub your temples right here, like you got a headache, like that. When you rub your temples, that's actually where your sphenoid bone is, right inside of there. That's underneath all that muscle. And you have a set of blood vessels and nerves that are right under that too. That's why the temple is so important to be protected, because if that gets damaged and those blood vessels get popped, game over. That's not a good thing. So you've got to keep that part of your head protected. But that forms that, and then that sphenoid bone joins back with the lower part of the occipital, and that forms the floor that holds your brain in place. Another bone that you do have that is really kind of interesting that I haven't talked about on the cat, and that is the lacrimal bone. The lacrimal bone is on the inside of your nose, on the inside of your eye, right in there, kind of in the corner, right there. You know where you have that little bump right there on the inside of your eye? That's the part that the lacrimal bone. You actually drain your tears through that little bump. Your tear glands, your lacrimal glands that produce tears, are above your eyes, and they actually, when you're emotional or you get dust in your eye, they actually flood your eyes with tears. Those tears come down and flood, and they drain out of the lacrimal gland, right, or the lacrimal opening right there, through that lacrimal bone. They drain through that, and it drains directly into your nasal cavity, which is why your nose starts to run if you're crying, because it just drains right in there. That's pretty cool. So these are the bones of the skull. Oh, the one I didn't talk about was the mandible, what we call the jawbone. Now in humans, our jawbone is fused in the front. In most mammals, it's not fused. It's actually in two different pieces like this, and you can click them together just like that to form what we call the mandible. And the mandible has that particular rod right there, that process, and that clicks in just behind the ear, just like that, and that's how the jaw works. And you can feel that articulation right back here. So the mandible is this bone. It's technically separate from the cranium, even though it's a part of what we call the skull, okay? And that has the lower teeth, just like the upper. You have incisors, canines, and then you have the premolars and molars, what we call the cheek teeth going back. So that's the mandible. It articulates right here. If you put your hand like that, right in front of your ear, and you can feel what's called the TMJ, the transmandibular joint, and that's right there in front of where your ear is. And those are the bones of the skull.